The Tuesday sky hung pale and washed out, as though even the heavens hadn't slept. Mildred Whitmore steadied herself at the vanity mirror. The navy dress clung neatly to her frame, its fabric whispering of a different time. Her 35th anniversary, Harold's proud smile as he'd handed her the wrapped box. 2 years had passed since that night. 3 months since Harold's death. She clasped the pearl necklace around her throat with hands that weren't quite steady. In the glass, the woman staring back at her looked older than she remembered. Hair streaked silver, lines carved deeper by nights spent alone. 64 felt heavier than the number itself. But today mattered. Today she was closing one chapter of Harold's life and stepping into whatever was left of her own. The phone call from Morrison and Associates had been clipped, professional. 2 o'clock, Mrs. Whitmore. Bring the documents. Nothing in the tone suggested sympathy. The law rarely did. She carried her purse and folder to the car, her heels sharp against the concrete of the garage. She tried to still the trembling in her hands as she slid into the driver's seat. The hum of traffic above seeped down, muffled and alien. She turned the key. "Ma'am, don't start that car!" The shout slammed into her ears. She jerked upright. A man stepped out from the shadows between the concrete pillars. His jacket was worn thin, jeans frayed at the cuffs, boots scarred with years of pavement. His hair was untidy, his face weathered, but his eyes were sharp, urgent, not the drifting haze of a beggar. Mildred's first instinct was fear. She reached for the door lock, her heart galloping. He lifted both hands in the air, palms open. "Please, I don't want to scare you." "Then step back." Her voice quivered despite her effort. "I will. Just listen first." His gaze flicked around the garage, scanning as if someone might be watching. Then he lowered his voice. "You're Mrs. Whitmore, Harold's widow." Her blood froze. "How do you know my name?" "I worked for Morrison and Associates, 12 years as a paralegal, until they threw me out. I heard things. About your husband's will, about your daughter-in-law." Her grip tightened on her purse. "Maisie?" He nodded once. "She's been visiting the firm, frequently, behind your back. They've been preparing documents, false ones, claiming you're not mentally competent, claiming Harold changed his will because he was worried about you." The words sliced through her. For a moment, the garage tilted sideways. She reached for the hood of the car to steady herself. "That's absurd," she whispered. "I'm perfectly fine." "I know," his voice cracked with urgency. "That's why I've been waiting here to warn you. Macy has been telling them you forget things, that you're confused, that you accused Michael of stealing from you." Her mouth dried. "Lies. All lies." "She forged documents," he continued. "Medical records, statements, enough to convince a judge you're incompetent, enough to put the estate into her hands." She stared at him. She wanted to dismiss him as mad, wanted to walk away, but a seed of dread was already burrowing. "What's your name?" she asked. Eddie Kowalski." Her mind ticked. Harold had mentioned that name once, faintly. One of the office staff who had fetched him coffee carried files. She remembered Harold saying, "That kid works hard, doesn't he? Lets the city chew him up." "What do you want from me, Eddie?" "Nothing." His eyes softened, heavy with a kind of quiet shame. "Just to do right by Harold. He was kind to me, more kind than most. I couldn't let them strip his wife of everything." The elevator dinged in the distance, echoing off concrete. Eddie flinched, retreating a step. "They'll try to rush you, get you to sign papers. Don't let them. Read everything. Don't let them tell you what Harold wanted. You already know." She studied him, a stranger in rags warning her about the people in suits upstairs. Before she could reply, he melted back into the shadows. Mildred stood there for long minutes, heart hammering. Her instincts warred. Run from the madman's rambling? Or believe? She thought of Macy's careful smiles, her whispered conversations with Michael, the subtle irritation when Mildred spoke about Harold. The dread rooted deeper. She pressed the elevator button. As the doors shut, she caught sight of Eddie behind a pillar, eyes dark with worry. The 15th floor smelled of polish and power. Mahogany furniture gleamed. Art lined the walls, expensive but impersonal. The receptionist looked up. "Mrs. Whitmore? They're waiting in conference room A." Mildred's heels clicked down the marble hallway. The quiet pressed in. Every door closed, muffled voices seeping through frosted glass. She stopped at the brass handle of Conference A. Through the blurred pane, she saw silhouettes, 3 men, 1 petite woman. Macy's frame. Her pulse thundered. She pushed open the door. The room was a stage dressed to intimidate. Long oak table, leather chairs, water pitcher beading with condensation. Morrison sat in the center, silver-haired, eyes coldly polite. 2 associates flanked him, suits crisp as knives. Macy sat opposite, cream sweater pristine, hair styled to perfection. For a fraction of a second, surprise flashed across her face. Then the sweet smile appeared. "Mildred, I didn't think you'd come today." Mildred matched her gaze. "Of course I came. This is about my husband." "Mrs. Whitmore," Morrison said, gesturing to a chair, "we appreciate your presence. We'll need your signature on a few documents." Mildred sat, purse on the table, hands folded. She could feel Macy's eyes avoiding hers, fixed instead on the stack of papers. "Before we begin," Mildred said, her voice steady, though her throat burned, "I want to understand exactly what we're discussing. Harold and I went over his will many times. I know his wishes." A flicker of unease passed among the attorneys. Morrison's lips thinned. "There have been amendments in his final weeks." "Stop." Mildred's tone cracked like ice. "What kind of amendments?" Macy leaned forward, feigning concern. "Mildred, he was worried about your health, your memory." The words struck like a slap. What health? What memory? An associate slid a folder across the table. Mildred opened it. Her hands trembled as she read Macy's handwriting. She grew agitated at the grocery store, couldn't recall what she had bought, accused Michael of stealing receipts. Her vision blurred. She forced herself to breathe. "This is false," she said coldly. "Every word." Macy's voice softened, almost pitying. "You may not remember, Mildred. That's the problem." The betrayal in her eyes burned hotter than grief. Then something caught her attention, a small black device blinking red in the corner. "You're recording this?" Morrison's expression didn't shift. "Standard procedure." "Protect me?" She spat the words. "You're protecting yourselves." A knock on the door interrupted. The secretary peeked in. "Mr. Morrison, someone is here, says it's urgent. Eddie Kowalski." Macy's face drained of color. "I don't know that name," Morrison snapped. "Send him away." Mildred stood. "No, I want to hear him." Macy's voice broke, shrill. "Mildred, don't!" But the door opened, and Eddie stepped inside, clutching his battered messenger bag. His presence was raw against the polish of the room. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, respectfully, "I'm sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this." The attorneys bristled, voices overlapping in protest. Morrison barked, "Security!" Eddie ignored them. He placed a manila folder on the table and slid it toward Mildred. Original documents, the real ones, before they were altered. The room fell silent. Mildred reached for the folder with trembling hands. Inside lay Harold's true will, signed and witnessed properly, exactly as he'd promised her. Alongside, medical reports in a doctor's scrawled handwriting, clear and direct, no signs of cognitive decline. Her throat tightened. Her husband had trusted her. Even in death, he had defended her. Macy's chair scraped as she sagged back, face white, lips trembling. Mildred raised her eyes.
Why, Macy? Why would you do this to me? Macy's voice cracked. We needed the money. We were drowning. Drowning, she repeated, each syllable like a verdict. So you tried to steal from me. Eddie's voice cut in, sharp. They planned to put you on $40,000 a year, while the rest of Harold's estate paid off their debts. Mildred closed the folder, hands steady now. She turned to Morrison. This ends here, or it continues, with the police. The blinking recorder light reflected in her pearls. The storm inside her was no longer grief, it was fire. And for the first time in months, Mildred Whitmore felt strong.
The silence in conference room A was suffocating. The recorder's red light blinked like a slow, mechanical heartbeat. Mildred sat at the head of the table now, her hands folded over Eddie's folder as though it were a shield. "Then make them," she said again, her voice low but resonant. Eddie's thumb hovered over his phone. Morrison's jaw tightened, the silver in his hair gleaming under the recessed lights. One of his associates shifted uncomfortably, his pen finally falling still. Maisie sat rigid in her chair, her ring twisting against her finger so furiously it looked like she might tear the skin. "You won't call anyone," Morrison said smoothly, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "This man is a disgruntled former employee. He has no authority here." Eddie's laugh was short, humorless. "Authority? I've got evidence. Originals. Enough to bury you." Morrison's hand slammed flat on the table. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. Maisie flinched. Mildred didn't. "Mrs. Whitmore," Morrison said, turning to her with forced calm, "these documents cannot be authenticated on the spot. The settlement today is in everyone's best interest. If we delay, Mildred interrupted, her eyes narrowing, "the truth comes out. Isn't that right?" Maisie made a strangled noise in her throat. She tried to speak, failed, then finally whispered, "Mildred, please." Mildred turned her gaze on her daughter-in-law, cold and steady. "You forged my husband's signature." Maisie's lips trembled. I didn't mean." "You didn't mean?" Mildred's voice rose sharp. "You spent months plotting behind my back. You lied about me, about Harold. You made me out to be senile. That wasn't an accident. That was intent." The walls of the room seemed to draw closer. The polished table, the leather chairs, the cold art on the walls, all became a trap closing in on Maisie. I had no choice," Maisie blurted out suddenly, her voice breaking. "Michael and I, our debts, our house, everything was drowning us. I thought the inheritance." "You thought you could steal from me," Mildred finished, her eyes wet but hard. The detectives exchanged glances. One officer moved to stand behind Maisie's chair. Chen closed the folder and looked at Morrison. "You and your associates will come with us. Fraud, forgery, conspiracy. Don't bother with denials. We've got invoices. We've got witnesses." Morrison's smooth facade collapsed. His eyes flicked toward Eddie, venomous. "You ruined everything." Eddie didn't flinch. "No, you ruined yourself." The officers cuffed Morrison and his two associates, the polished suits, the tailored ties, all meaningless as the steel clicked around their wrists. Maisie sagged in her chair, pale as a ghost. She wasn't cuffed yet. Chen crouched beside her, voice softer but unyielding. "You can help yourself, cooperate, testify against them. But if you hold back, you'll take the full fall." Maisie's lips trembled. "Michael doesn't know. He thinks it was Harold's idea." Mildred's chest tightened at her son's name. She whispered, half to herself, half to Eddie, "My own son believed I was losing my mind." Eddie placed a steady hand on the back of her chair. "He believed her lies. That doesn't make them true." Maisie sobbed harder. "Please, Mildred, I never wanted to hurt you. Mildred cut her off with a look. It was not anger now, but something colder. Finality. You already did. Chen straightened, nodding to the officer. Take her in. The click of handcuffs closed around Maisie's wrists. She whimpered, her tears dripping onto the polished wood of the table. As they led her out, she glanced back at Mildred. For a moment, her mask cracked. Not the sweet daughter-in-law, not the desperate conspirator, but a broken woman, pleading silently for forgiveness. Mildred did not return the look. When the room finally emptied, Morrison, the associates, Maisie, all taken away, Mildred was left with Eddie and Detective Chen. The recorder sat dark and silent. The city hummed beyond the glass. Chen placed a business card on the table. Mrs. Whitmore will need a full statement, tomorrow preferably, but tonight, go home, rest. You've been through hell. Mildred nodded slowly, her eyes still on the folder. I nearly believed them, she whispered. I nearly thought Harold had doubted me in his final days. He did it. Eddie crouched beside her chair, his eyes level with hers. Don't you ever believe that. In something in his voice, earnest, raw, cut through the haze. Mildred's lips trembled. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to cry. Not for Harold's death, not for the betrayal, but for the truth finally clawing its way into daylight. Eddie stayed beside her, steady as an anchor. When the tears subsided, Mildred lifted her chin. Her face was streaked, her pearls askew, but her eyes burned with something new. Resolve. Tomorrow, she said, I'll give my statement and I'll make sure none of them get away with this. Chen nodded. That's the spirit. She gathered the evidence, tucked the folder under her arm, and left with the officers. The room was quiet again, empty. Mildred stood slowly, her heels echoed on the marble as she walked out. The receptionist avoided her gaze. In the reflection of the elevator doors, Mildred saw a woman transformed, not fragile, not defeated, but sharpened by betrayal into steel. As the doors closed, Eddie stepped in beside her. His presence was quiet, steady, but she felt it like a shield. Thank you, she said softly. He shook his head. Don't thank me yet. It's only beginning. The elevator descended, carrying them both down into a world forever changed.
The elevator shuddered to a stop and opened on the lobby. Marble, glass, a hush that pretended nothing had happened upstairs. Mildred stepped out first, her pearls turned slightly off-center like a crescent. Eddie stayed half a pace behind, a quiet bodyguard nobody had hired. Outside, late afternoon light pooled on the sidewalk. The wind tugged at the corner of the police tape now flapping at the building entrance. Already 2 uniforms posted there. The receptionist craning her neck to watch, phone pressed to her cheek as if gossip could plug the hole where scandal leaped. I'll walk you to your car, Eddie said. You'll come by tomorrow, Mildred replied. Not a question, not a plea. If the detective needs me. I need you, she said. And it surprised them both. They crossed the garage in silence. Mildred could feel the morning's dread still living here, tucked between concrete ribs, but the fear had changed shape. In its place, a strange, spare relief, like a winter tree once the storm peels away the dead limbs and leaves what's meant to stand. At the sedan, Eddie pulled the door open and stepped back. They'll call you tonight, he said. They always do when their story starts to fall apart. They'll want to get ahead of the truth. Who? She asked, though she knew. Your son, Eddie said. Maybe her. Mildred's hand tightened on the frame so hard her knuckles whitened. If he calls, I don't know what voice I'll hear, my boy or the echo she put in his mouth. Then wait until you can tell the difference, Eddie said gently. She got in. The engine turned over, and for a second she saw the morning again. The shout, the open hands, the way her heart had stampeded at the word daughter-in-law. She exhaled until her chest unlocked. When she looked up, Eddie was still there, 2 fingers lifted in a small salute. She nodded, pulled out, climbed the spiral to daylight. The house felt larger than it had in months. Afternoon sun slanted through the kitchen, laying long rectangles on the floorboards Harold had sanded himself one summer, when the sander kept jamming and he kept swearing under his breath until she laughed and made lemonade. Mildred set her purse on the counter, peeled off the pearls, laid them in the ceramic dish shaped like a leaf. She turned the faucet, cold water filled a glass. She drank it in 3 long, rude gulps that would have made Harold raise an eyebrow and grin. The phone buzzed the second she set the glass down. Michael. She didn't answer. The screen glowed with his name until it went black again. Then a voicemail, then another call. Then a text that didn't show the words, only the preview. Mom, please pick up. Mildred placed the phone face down on the tile and stood very still. The ceiling fan hummed softly. Outside, a dog barked twice and gave up. On the dining table, the stack of condolence cards was still there, neat as a ritual. She touched the top envelope, then picked it up and moved it an inch to the right, an inch back, the way you touch a scar to remember where it begins and ends. She left it there and went upstairs. In the bedroom, she unzipped the navy dress and let it fall into her hands. The silk whispered as it slid from her shoulders. She hung it on the padded hanger and pressed the fabric flat. In the mirror, the woman looking back had red-rimmed eyes and salt-silver hair and a mouth that learned something today it would not unlearn. The shower beat against her shoulders until the skin glowed. When she came out wrapped in Harold's old robe, the one soft as apology, the phone was buzzing again on the nightstand. She let it. She climbed into bed fully awake and lay on her side staring at Harold's pillow. The indent was long gone, but some part of her insisted it was still there if she just looked from the correct angle. She reached out and laid her palm where his head used to be. "Good night," she whispered to nobody, and slept like a door swinging shut and catching. Morning came, thin and pale. Mildred dressed in gray slacks and a white blouse, tied her hair back and clipped the pearls on again because armor doesn't have to be loud. She made coffee, 2 mugs out of habit, set one down instinctively on the opposite side of the table, then picked it up and poured it back, embarrassed, though there was no one to witness it but the maple tree outside the window. At 9:02 a.m., she walked into the precinct. The lobby chairs were molded plastic and the vending machine rattled like it was considering dropping a soda, even if you hadn't paid. Fluorescence hummed overhead. Detective Chen met her at the door to interview too, with a cup of decent coffee and a little nod. "You look like you slept," Chen said. "I did," Mildred answered, surprised to hear it true. They sat across from each other at a scuffed table, a recorder that wasn't sinister this time, a yellow pad, 2 pens. Chen's posture loose enough to be kind, straight enough to be believed. "Let's start at the beginning," Chen said, pressing the button. "State your name." "Mildred Ann Whitmore." She didn't know why it felt like swearing in. "For the record, I'm Detective Sarah Chen. This is a voluntary statement regarding suspected forgery, fraud, and conspiracy involving Morrison and Associates and your daughter-in-law, Maisie Whitmore." They walked through it scene by scene. The call from the firm, the garage, Eddie, the conference room and the slow, ugly theater of it, Morrison's smooth lies, the blinking red light, the folder, Harold's signature alive on paper where it belonged. When Mildred's voice trembled, Chen didn't pounce, she waited. When she reached for the water, Chen slid the cup closer. When Mildred said, "They wanted to make me small," Chen scribbled something she didn't read aloud and said, "Not today." "Your son," Chen said, pen hovering. "What does he know?" "Not the truth," Mildred said. "Not yet." Chen nodded as if that was not just information, but strategy. "We'll be contacting him today. He'll hear it from us if not from you. Be prepared." "For him to hate me?" Mildred asked, realizing the absurdity the moment she said it. "For him to be disoriented," Chen said. "When people lose the script they were handed, they flail." "He should," Mildred said softly. "It wasn't his script." Chen capped the pen and tapped the pad lightly. "One more thing. Eddie Kowalski. He's credible. He's also vulnerable. If you want him kept out of the blast radius, let me know. We can loop services in. Or..." She measured Mildred with a quick glance. "You already have a plan. I have a guest room above Harold's workshop. It has a leaking radiator and a view of the compost bin. But the bed is good." Chen's mouth twitched. "The city could use more women like you." She clicked off the recorder. "I'll be in touch when we arraign. Morrison is already retained counsel. They're loud. Loud doesn't mean right. Eddie was on a bench outside the interview room, elbows on knees, hands linked loose like a man who has learned that posture makes you look like less trouble. He rose when she stepped out. "You told her everything," Mildred said. "Except the embarrassing parts," he said. "Like how long it took me to stop hoping they'd ask me back." "You won't go back there," Mildred said, matter-of-factly. "You'll come with me. There's a radiator with a personality you'll need to introduce yourself to." He blinked, then huffed a laugh that sounded like a breath freed. "Mrs. W., I can't." "You can, and you will. You'll work for me. We'll find a proper title so your pride doesn't kick and buck. Caretaker, groundskeeper, archivist of truth. That last one's a lot to fit on a tax form. Then we'll hyphenate," she said, moving past him. "Come on. I'm suddenly hungry." They ate lunch in a diner that smelled like bacon and mop water. The waitress called everyone sweetheart and forgot your order cheerfully once before remembering it perfectly. Eddie cut his sandwich with a plastic knife, precise like it mattered. "I used to bring Harold his coffee," he said, without looking up. "He always tipped me like I ran the place." "He believed in overpaying for kindness," Mildred said. "He told me once it's the only line item that compounds." Eddie nodded, mouth twisting. They noticed. The partners. They notice everything that can be turned into something else. "You noticed more," she said. "You did something." He shrugged, a small movement. "I slept in my car last month," he said finally, the words light as if they might float away if he weighted them. "It was loud and hot, and I kept thinking, this is the part of the movie where the guy does something stupid."
Not as punishment, but because her heart couldn't jump that many times without bruising. Detective Chen checked in. The DA wanted everything labeled twice. An investigator came by and took the recorder Morrison had been so proud of. The local paper sent a polite email asking for comment about alleged malfeasance at a prominent firm. Mildred sent them Detective Chen's card and nothing else. In the evenings, Eddie patched the radiator and discovered a colony of dust bunnies in the vent that could apply for statehood. He stacked wood by the back step and mowed the little stretch of lawn Harold used to handle with monkish devotion. When he knocked on her kitchen door to announce the leak had ceased its symphony, he did it with a kind of shyness, like a boy proud of a report card. "Good," Mildred said. "Now you can learn the toaster. Its spite burns when you don't ask nicely." They developed a tiny gravity between rooms. He never lingered, she never hovered. Occasionally they met at the threshold with a shared joke. The compost bin was winning, the squirrels were unionizing, the mailman had decided to smile again. On the third afternoon, at precisely 2 p.m., the doorbell rang. Mildred had been standing at the sink removing the last brown edges from a bunch of celery because waste felt like a sin that week. At the sound, her hand paused, knife suspended. She set both down, wiped her palms on a towel, and went to the door. Through the peephole, Michael. Eyes shadowed, hair raked by hands, his expensive jacket creased like he'd slept in it. Beside him, Maisie. Smaller than Mildred had ever seen her, or else the scale of her had finally adjusted to the truth. No foundation to smooth the blotches under her eyes. Her hands were empty. For once, she wasn't holding the performance. Mildred opened the door but filled the space with herself, so there was no misunderstanding. "Mom," Michael said, the word landing broken. "We need to talk." "We do," Mildred agreed. She stepped aside and let the air decide whether it wanted them inside. It did. They walked past her into the living room that had held their Christmases and their small arguments and every ordinary Sunday that now looked suspicious in retrospect. The room took them in, but made no promises. Michael went to the couch and stopped halfway, as if the cushions might remember what had been said here and refuse to hold him. Maisie stayed near the doorway. pale fingers ghosting over the back of the dining chair, not claiming it. Eddie's footfalls sounded in the hall. 2 steps and a halt. He understood without being told and drifted back the way he'd come. Deference in the retreat. Mildred remained standing. If you lie to me once, you leave. If you deflect, you leave. If you tell me what someone else believes, what she believes, she tipped her chin at Maisie without really looking, you leave. Do you understand? Michael's throat worked. Yes. Good, Mildred said. She sat at the far end of the couch and placed her palms on her knees, like she could hold herself steady with her own hands. Then start at the beginning. Michael looked at his wife. Maisie looked at the floor. When neither spoke, Mildred's eyebrow lifted a fraction. Michael swallowed. I didn't know about the forgeries. And the deads? Mildred asked. Yes, he said, and the word was a stone he finally put down. The business, I was drowning. I kept thinking I'd fix it before anybody had to know. His voice flickered. She told me Dad was worried about you, about your memory. Mildred said nothing. She let the silence weigh the sentence. I believed her, he said into that weight. I believed my wife over my mother. I don't know how to make that sentence belong to me without choking. By finishing it, Mildred said. Finish it properly. He nodded, eyes bright. I was wrong. Maisie made a soft, involuntary sound. Mildred turned her head slowly. Your turn. Maisie straightened, a brittle motion without energy. I've spoken to Detective Chen. I'm cooperating. That's logistics, Mildred said. I asked for the beginning. Maisie's gaze skittered around the room, catching and avoiding. The framed photo of Harold grinning with a lopsided hedge behind him, the blue bowl filled with keys nobody used, the throw blanket folded so precisely it might have come ironed. She started keeping notes, she said finally, each word like she had to dislodge it with a fingernail. Little things. When you misplaced your glasses, when you repeated a question, when you put the milk... She stopped herself. Things everyone does. I wrote them down like evidence. Because? Mildred asked. Because the lawyer said it would help. Because the debt was a fire, and I didn't know how to stop it. And this was water that didn't belong to me, and I poured it anyway. Mildred stared at her. The pit in her stomach was wide and precise. She could see its edge from here. You followed me, Mildred said. With a camera. Yes. You wrote lies under photographs of my life. Yes. It came smaller, barely air. Mildred inhaled through her nose and let it out very slowly. She didn't trust the tremor in her hands, so she pressed them together until the tendons stood out. Michael, Mildred said without looking at him, you're going to buy a notebook on your way home. On the first page, you'll write, I doubted my mother. On the second page, you'll write, I believed a lie because it came wearing love. On the third page, you'll write, I will not do that again. He blinked hard and nodded like a man who knows ritual is not magic, but needs it anyway. Maisie's voice cracked. Mildred, I am sorry. I don't care, Mildred said, not cruelly, just exactly. You were very good at playing the part of the woman who says, sorry, and then finds a smarter way to do the same harm. I am no longer the stage for that performance. Maisie's eyes filled. What do you want me to do? Mildred looked at the woman who had called her Mom in Christmas photos and Mrs. Whittemore in emails to lawyers. 1,000 small courtesies marched through her head and stood in a line waiting to be forgiven. She felt none of them move. You will tell Detective Chen everything. You will testify. You will return every dollar paid to that firm, even if you have to sell your shoes and your cars and the white lie you keep for yourself in your nightstand. You will say my name to the judge without dressing it in pity. And then you will stay out of my life. Maisie's shoulders buckled, but she didn't fall. The shame had found a chair and sat down. Michael reached for his mother's hand and stopped halfway, asking a question with his fingers. Mildred let him take it. His palm was warm and shaking like he was 20 again and sick and pretending not to be. I don't know how to be your son right now, he said. So quietly it leaned forward and asked to be heard. Tell the truth, she said. We'll start there. A clock somewhere in the house ticked once, sudden, intrusive, real. The room let out a long breath. Outside, tires crunched on gravel. A car door shut. A firm knock. Measured. Official. Eddie's silhouette moved in the hallway, then backed away, deference in the retreat. Mildred stood. That will be Detective Chen. Michael rose as if to shield something that didn't need shielding. Maisie wiped her face and failed to tidy it. Mildred crossed to the door. Her hand hovered over the knob for the length of a heartbeat, the old muscle memory of letting fear go first. Then she turned it and opened the door onto what came next. Detective Chen stood on the porch, file tucked under one arm, wind lifting a strand of hair she didn't bother to tame. Her eyes flicked past Mildred to Michael and Maisie, cataloged the configuration, and returned to Mildred's face. Good afternoon, Chen said. I'm here to discuss next steps. Mildred nodded once, stepped aside, and let the law into her living room. And for the first time since Harold's last breath, she felt like the house was not too big for just one person.
Detective Sarah Chen stepped into the Whitmore living room as though she owned the air. She closed the door behind her, set the file neatly on the coffee table, and looked around the room like it was a witness in need of questioning. Michael shifted uncomfortably, half rising, then sinking back into the couch cushions. Maisie stayed perched on the edge of her chair, pale, her eyes darting like a cornered animal. Mildred stood tall near the mantel, one hand resting on the photograph of Harold in his younger days, holding a fishing rod with a grin that stretched from ear to ear. She felt his presence in the room like a silent judge. Mrs. Whitmore, Chen began, I know this isn't easy, but you need to hear the options. I don't need options, Mildred said firmly. I need justice. Chen's eyes softened. Justice has many doors. Which one we walk through will depend on testimony, hers in particular. She tilted her chin toward Maisie. Maisie's fingers clenched the hem of her sweater. I told you already. I'll cooperate. I'll testify. Michael's head jerked toward her. Maisie? Don't, Mildred snapped, her voice slicing through the air. Not another word of defense for her. Michael fell silent, shame flushing his face. Chen opened the file. Papers whispered as she spread them on the table, copies of forged medical reports, invoices from Morrison and Associates, surveillance photos. Each page was another nail in the coffin of lies. Mrs. Whitmore, Chen said, with this evidence, Morrison and his associates will go down. The DA's office is eager. They want to make an example. As for Mrs. Maisie Whitmore, she paused, her gaze pinning Maisie like a butterfly. If she cooperates fully, she could avoid prison. Probation, community service, restitution. Mildred's jaw tightened. And if she doesn't cooperate? Then she faces felony charges. Fraud, conspiracy, potentially forgery. We're talking years. Maisie's eyes brimmed. Please, she whispered, turning to Mildred. Please don't let them put me in prison. Michael, say something. Michael buried his face in his hands. His voice came muffled. Maisie, you've already destroyed everything. What do you expect me to say? Mildred's gaze stayed hard. She expects you to rescue her. That's what liars do. They assume someone else will clean their mess. Maisie shot to her feet, her voice cracking. I did it for us. For you, Michael. You were drowning. Your business, the debts. What was I supposed to do? Watch everything collapse? You chose, Mildred said coldly, to push me under instead. The room buzzed with tension, silence so sharp it could cut. Chen broke it, calm but firm. Enough. This isn't about who shouts louder. This is about choices from here on out. Maisie, you'll have to sign a cooperation agreement. Full testimony, no lies. If you waver, the DA won't hesitate to revoke the deal. Maisie nodded, trembling. Chen packed the papers back into the file. Now one more thing. Michael, your name is on financial records tied to Maisie. Loans, mortgages, credit cards. If you knew nothing of the fraud, you'll still face scrutiny. You need to prepare. Michael lifted his head, haunted. So, even if I didn't touch a forged document, you lived under the same roof. Ignorance is not always a defense, but honesty will help. Michael exhaled shakily. He looked at his mother. Mom, I swear I didn't know. I should have, but I didn't. Mildred's heart twisted. She wanted to believe him. She almost did. But trust was a fragile thing once shattered. Chen stood. I'll leave you to talk, but remember, tomorrow morning we move forward with charges. Decisions need to be final. She left, the door clicking shut behind her. The silence that followed was louder than any shouting. Mildred crossed to the window. The garden Harold had tended looked overgrown, wild.
The maple tree's leaves were turning, red fire bleeding into green. She pressed her palm to the glass, grounding herself. Behind her, Maisie's voice broke the quiet. Mildred, please, I was wrong. But I can change. I can make it right. Mildred turned slowly. You can never make this right. Not with me. Maisie crumpled, sobbing into her hands. Michael sat rigid, staring at the floor. For a long time, no one moved. Finally, Mildred spoke, her voice low but ironclad. Michael. He looked up, his eyes rimmed red. You will have to choose, she said. Her or the truth. You cannot have both. He blinked, as though struck. Mom, she's my wife. She's your betrayer, Mildred snapped, and she nearly made you my betrayer, too. Michael's lips trembled. I love her. Then love her from a distance, because she will never step foot in this house again. Maisie sobbed louder. Michael stared at his mother, torn in half. And in that moment, Mildred realized the cruelest truth of all. No matter how this ended, her family would never be whole again. Late that night, the house was dark. Mildred sat alone on the porch, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Eddie emerged from the workshop apartment, carrying 2 mugs of tea. He set one beside her and sat quietly. He came. Yes. How was it? Mildred stared into the night. Like standing in front of a fire, deciding whether to burn or run. Eddie sipped his tea. You didn't run. No. She tilted her head, eyes glistening. But Michael might run. Eddie didn't answer. Some truths don't need words. The crickets sang, the maple leaves rustled, and the night wrapped around them both. And Mildred knew. Tomorrow would bring confrontation. In court and at home. And not everyone would survive it whole. The courthouse smelled of paper and polish, like secrets pressed flat and filed away. Mildred walked through the security gate with her pearl necklace hidden under her blouse, as if its quiet weight could anchor her. Eddie walked beside her, his jacket freshly pressed, borrowed, not bought. His posture was protective, though nobody had asked him to be.
Reporters clustered at the steps like vultures. Cameras clicked, microphones extended. Mrs. Whitmore, did your daughter-in-law forge your husband's will? Do you believe Morrison and Associates targeted other families? Are you mentally competent to handle your inheritance? The last question cut sharp. Mildred's spine straightened. She did not answer. Eddie moved subtly, guiding her past the swarm, his body a quiet wall. Inside, the courtroom was cold marble and oak benches. The whisper of voices floated like smoke. At the front, Morrison sat at the defense table, his silver hair immaculate, his face arranged into weary dignity. His two associates flanked him, pale and tense. And then there was Maisie. She sat alone at a separate table, her cream sweater replaced with a plain gray suit that swallowed her small frame. Her hair hung limp, her face bare of makeup. She looked younger, smaller, fragile, but Mildred's chest burned with the memory of her neat handwriting under those photographs, the lies dressed as truth. Michael sat behind her, wringing his hands. He looked like a man caught between drowning and refusing to swim. The judge entered. Everyone rose. The proceedings began. The district attorney laid it out cleanly. Forged documents, fabricated medical reports, false testimony designed to steal millions from a widow. Eddie's evidence became the spine of the case, his copies the nails that pin Morrison's lies to the wall. Morrison's lawyer objected, spun words like silk, disgruntled employee, misunderstood amendments, family disagreements exaggerated into criminal claims. But every time he spoke, Eddie's quiet testimony under oath cut through. I worked there 12 years. I saw the invoices. I handled the files. I know what's real. Mildred's turn came. She stood, hands clasped, voice steady. My husband trusted me, she said, her eyes sweeping the room. For 42 years, he trusted me. These men tried to erase that trust. This woman, she turned, looking directly at Maisie, called me mother, while plotting to declare me incompetent. They wanted me small, silent, erased. Her voice broke for the first time. But Harold's signature is here, real, untouched, and I will not let anyone rewrite his love into doubt. The courtroom was silent. Even the reporters stopped scratching their pens. Maisie's eyes filled, but Mildred did not look away. The judge recessed for lunch. Outside, reporters swarmed again. Michael tried to approach his mother, his face desperate. Mom, please, wait! But Eddie stepped between them. Not now. Michael's eyes flared. Who are you to keep me from my mother? Mildred's voice cut in, calm but sharp. He's the man who saved me, the one who told me the truth when you couldn't see it. Michael froze, his shame washing his features. I didn't know, Mom. I swear I didn't. You believed her lies, and that nearly destroyed me. Michael's mouth opened, closed. His eyes glistened. I don't know how to fix this. Then start by telling the truth, Mildred said. She brushed past him, Eddie at his side, leaving her son standing on the courthouse steps, shattered. That night, the story broke wide. News anchors spoke her name. Her face flashed on screens. Headlines screamed. Widow targeted in multi-million-dollar estate fraud. Law firm partners arrested in forgery scheme. Daughter-in-law accused in shocking betrayal.
Mildred sat in her living room, the television flickering, her tea untouched. Eddie turned the volume down. Does it feel strange, he asked quietly, to have your life on everyone's tongue? It feels like being skinned alive, Mildred whispered. The phone buzzed again. Michael. She let it ring. Maisie's face appeared on the screen, grainy courtroom footage of her head bowed, hands cuffed. Mildred stared at it until her eyes blurred. She'll testify, Eddie said. Chen says she'll take the deal. She'll save herself, Mildred said bitterly. That's what she's always done. Eddie looked at her steady. And what about you? What will you do now? Mildred drew in a breath. long and shaky. I'll fight. For Harold. For the truth. Even if it costs me my son. Eddie nodded. Then you won't fight alone. Outside, the maple tree rustled in the night wind. Inside, Mildred's heart steeled itself for the battles ahead, not just in court, but at home, in the fragile ruins of her family. The DA's conference room was 2 sizes too small for what it needed to hold. Boxes of discovery, a whiteboard sketched with arrows and dates, the stale smell of coffee that had been brave too long. Morning sun pushed through Venetian blinds in zebra stripes. Mildred sat at the end of the table, pearls tucked under the collar of a blue blouse. Eddie took the chair to her right, a legal pad in front of him, though he didn't write a word. Detective Chen stood by the whiteboard, tapping a capped marker against her palm. Here's the posture. Partners are pleading not guilty. They're posturing for leverage, but the invoices and emails are ugly. We expect one associate to flip within 48 hours. She pointed to a name circled twice. Bergman. He handled the billing. He'll choose survival. And Maisie? Mildred asked. The name tasted like something metallic. Her counsel's asking for a cooperation agreement. Full cooperation in exchange for probation, restitution, community service. We're pushing for the top end on service hours and a public apology as part of allocution. Mildred's jaw tightened. Public. Chen met her gaze. People need to hear the scheme from a participant. It protects others. Eddie leaned forward, elbows on the table. What about pressure? Retaliation? She exchanged a quick look with the ADA, a woman with kind eyes and a hard voice. We've already seen signs, the ADA said. Anonymous emails to a local blog suggesting Mrs. Whitmore is confused and easily manipulated. They didn't stick, but it's a taste. Mildred's mouth tilted, a smile with no warmth. They're still writing my lines for me. Not anymore, Chen said. From now on, we write them. A knock. The door opened. Michael stepped in like a storm that didn't know where to rain. His tie was crooked, face unshaved, a folder clutched so tight the cardboard bent. Mildred, he caught himself. Mom. Every head turned. Chen gestured to a chair. Mr. Whitmore, sit. He didn't. He put the folder on the table and opened it with the ceremony of a confession. Statements, credit card bills, a printout of emails, some flagged, some forwarded from an account he hadn't known existed. He started digging, he said, voice hoarse. After court, after seeing all of it, I needed to know how deep. He tapped a page. She opened a line of credit in my name 18 months ago. She authorized a home equity loan I didn't sign. She used a power of attorney I didn't grant. His hand shook. She set up filters on my email. Messages from the accountant, flagged, routed to a folder I never see. She built a world where I only saw what she wanted. Silence pooled. Mildred swallowed and kept her voice steady. You brought it. He said, I brought it. And I'll testify. Whatever you need from me. I don't know how to make up for the way I looked at you. His voice cracked. He shoved his hands into his pockets like they might hold him up. Chen slid the folder toward her. Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. This helps. He nodded, finally seeing Eddie with something like recognition. You're Eddie. Eddie stood to shake his hand. Yes, sir. You saved my mother, Michael said, not letting go for a beat. Then he did. He turned back to Mildred. Can I... He didn't finish. Some questions don't know their own grammar. You can come to dinner, Mildred said. At 6. She let him see the condition in it. Truth or don't come. He nodded like a vow. 6. The package on the porch looked like cookies. Brown paper, twine, a note scotch taped to the top. For Mrs. Whitmore. Thinking of you.
Mrs. Y? He called through the screen door. In the kitchen. He set the box on the table between the fruit bowl and the newspaper and peeled the tape back carefully. No smell. Inside, not cookies. Photographs, glossy and wrong. Eddie's car. Eddie at the precinct door. Eddie on the porch with a mug. On top, a typed card. You picked the wrong side. He didn't move for a heartbeat. Then he slid the box lid back on and turned it so the card faced down. Mildred came in drying her hands on a towel. "Who's thinking of me?" "Somebody with a camera and a printer," Eddie said lightly, "which is how you speak when you don't want to hand someone your fear." She read the card. Her eyes changed. Not panic, clarity. She reached for her phone and tapped a number she didn't have to look up. "Detective Chen," she said when the line clicked alive. "We have mail." Chen arrived 20 minutes later, hair pulled back, eyes narrowed. She lifted the photos with a pen and swore under her breath in a language Mildred didn't know but appreciated. "They're trying to spook the witness. Classic. Sloppy." "Should we be worried?" Eddie asked. "You should be careful," Chen said, "but worried is for people who don't have friends in my office." She looked around the kitchen. "We'll install a camera on the porch and motion lights along the drive. I'll ask for extra patrols. And Eddie, until this quiets down, no predictable routines. Vary your route. Don't park in the same place." "He lives above the workshop," Mildred said, a statement that was also a refusal to apologize for it. Chen smiled at that. "Then maybe choose a different window to look out of while you drink your coffee." Eddie left, the sound a little loud. "Yes, ma'am." When Chen left, Mildred stayed at the table, one hand flat on the wood. Eddie leaned in the doorway and watched the set of her shoulders. "You can ask me to leave, if this brings trouble to your door." She looked up at him like he'd suggested she sell the maple tree for firewood. "I won't." "It's not just you," he said quietly. "It's Michael. Michael is a grown man. He can walk through a door and lock it behind him. I won't start locking doors on people who bring me truth." He looked at her for a long time, then nodded, a decision settling into his bones. 6 o'clock glowed on the oven clock. The kitchen smelled like chicken and rosemary, and whatever memory does to sautéed onions to make them taste like 10 winters of comfort. Michael arrived on time. He stood in the doorway and took in the table. 2 plates, a third set of cutlery on the counter like an invitation that could be accepted or left. He pressed his lips together and stepped inside. "I didn't know if you'd want me to bring anything," he said. "You brought what mattered," Mildred said, ladling stew into bowls. "Sit." They ate like people learning to trust food again. A bite, a glance, a word that doesn't bump the furniture. Michael set his spoon down with care. "I saw Maisie today," he said. He stared at the wood grain as if it could tell him a different story. "At her lawyer's office. She asked to see me." "Why?" Mildred asked. "To pull me back. To apologize like a curtain call. To make sure I still think she's a good person who made a bad choice." "And what did you say?" "I asked her when. Not why. When. When did you decide my mother was an acceptable casualty? Was it the first time you followed her to the bank or the last time you told me she forgot the stove?" He rubbed his jaw. "She said it was the day she saw Dad's balance sheet at a doctor's visit. The numbers made her dizzy. She drove home and thought about 2 mortgages and a credit line and a man she loved who didn't know how to fail. She decided then." Mildred's hand tightened around her fork. That doctor's office, the place where Harold wore a brave face and she counted the minutes by the rhythm of machines. A sanctuary turned factory. "She cried," she added. "She always cries at the right time." "And?" Mildred asked. "I told her I'm done. I told her I'll cooperate with the DA, and then I'm filing. I can't share a house with a person who rewrote my father's last months and tried to shrink my mother to fit a document." He looked up, eyes very blue, very tired. I told her to stop using your name like a prop. Something loosened under Mildred's ribs. It wasn't triumph. It was relief with an ache in it. I'll help you pack, she said, if you need it. He laughed once, the sound breaking. I don't think I should trust myself with the photo albums. Then let me. I'll make you a box. One for keeping, one for forgiving, one for forgetting. They ate a little more. Eddie came in quietly, set a small basket of rolls on the table, and retreated like a stagehand who knows the scene belongs to someone else. What about the business? Mildred asked. He wiped his mouth. I signed the lease. A small office, Whitmore Consulting. I want to build it right. No lies, no shortcuts. Do you know how many clients appreciate the sentence, I don't know, but I'll find out? All the good ones, Mildred said. I think so. They moved to the living room after dishes, a ritual so old it remembered where to put their shadows. The television was off. The house felt like it was listening. Mom, Michael said after a while, can you come with me to see Dad? To the cemetery. I haven't been since the funeral. The confession was raw. Mildred looked at her son, the boy who used to climb into her lap with muddy shoes, the man who had tried to carry a house on his back until his spine spoke. Yes, she said. Tomorrow morning. He nodded, blinked too fast. Thank you. She reached over and took his hand. Tell me what you're afraid of. Not the big thing, the small, ridiculous thing you haven't said out loud. He laughed without humor. That I'll stand there and tell him I failed and the ground will open and swallow me. The ground won't, she said. It already took what it came for. He breathed out. Okay. Night unfurled. At 11, Mildred turned off the porch light and checked the back door twice. The maple whispered against the roof. She climbed the stairs, paused outside the workshop apartment. A thin sliver of light at the bottom of Eddie's door. She knocked softly. He opened with a book in his hand and a pencil behind his ear, like a boy studying for a test he chose. Can you sleep? She asked. Learning to, he said. You? Practicing. She looked down the stairs, then back. Thank you for the rolls. He grinned. Store-bought. I took them out of the bag before I brought them in, so it looked like I baked. Deception forgiven, she said. Good night. Good night, Miss Y. She went to bed. Sleep came on the second try. At 2:17 a.m., motion lights flared along the drive like a warning. Eddie's feet hit the apartment floor before his brain fully woke. He grabbed a jacket, shoved his feet into boots without socks, and moved to the window that didn't overlook his usual view. The advice he'd been given turned into muscle. Down by the curb, a figure in a hood stood too close to Mildred's mailbox. A whisper of metal, the tiny sound of tape being pulled. Eddie eased the door open and stepped onto the landing. Hey, he called, casual, a man greeting a neighbor. Are you lost? The figure jerked and backed away, but not quickly. A car idled at the corner, lights off, engine a low purr. Eddie walked down the steps, every sense bright. I asked if you're lost, he said again, now closer. The figure turned and ran. The car's headlights snapped on, the door yanked open from inside. The runner dove in, the car peeled off, tires whining, taillights disappearing like red coins tossed into dark water. Eddie jogged to the mailbox. A padded envelope hung half in, half out. New tape glinting. He didn't touch it. Mildred, he called, controlled. Stay inside. He pulled his phone and hit Chen's number with his thumb. Lights came on in the house. Mildred appeared at the window in her robe, her phone to her ear. I heard, Chen said, on both ends of the line at once. Step away, units dispatched. They watched the envelope like it might move. In the far distance, a siren wove its sound through the trees. Eddie stood in the drive, hands in sight, the way you stand when you don't want to give any story a wrong prop. 2 squad cars slid up quiet. Officers layered the scene with procedure: photos, gloves, little bags. The envelope contained nothing explosive, nothing that could be diffused with pliers, just a single sheet of paper with 11 words typed in a font that thought it was professional. People who poke hornets should know what hornets do back. Charming, Chen said when she arrived. Hair in a ponytail, badge swinging. They're trying to spook the witness. Classic sloppy.
Mildred hugged her robe tighter. Good. Chen glanced at her, surprised, then smiled. Good. She turned to Eddie. You did right. Thank you. He shrugged. I like this mailbox. When they were gone and the motion lights cut out, the dark came back in close. Mildred and Eddie stood on the porch, the night cool against their faces. They're trying to teach us to flinch, Mildred said. Then we won't, Eddie answered. She looked up at the maple, at its leaves like dark hands. Tomorrow, she said, we visit Harold. Eddie nodded. I'll drive you, and I'll pretend the radio's broken so you can talk to him in peace. Thank you, she said. They went inside. The house breathed. Somewhere a fox barked, the sound sharp as chalk on slate. Then the world folded itself back into quiet. Morning made the cemetery look like it belonged to another state. Soft hills, honest wind, rows of names catching the light. They walked side by side, carrying nothing. The stone was simple. Harold Whitmore, beloved husband and father, 1959, 2025. Someone had left a small river stone on top. Mildred didn't know who and liked it that way. She stood with her hands in her coat pockets and let the silence be the first prayer. Michael hovered a step back, like a boy at the edge of a pool deciding if he was cold or brave. Hi, Mildred said, and the ridiculousness of the greeting made her smile. We brought the boy. He's taller than you remember. He's about to be heavier with honesty. Michael made a sound that might have been a laugh. He stepped up, touched the stone with 2 fingers, a gesture so gentle it could have passed for apology. Dad, I screwed up. The wind took the words and set them down at Mildred's feet. He kept talking, not loud, not lyrical. He told the truth like he'd been practicing. I believed the wrong person. I doubted the right one. I forgot how you loved her. I forgot how she raised me. Mildred listened without watching his face. She let the names of ordinary mistakes pile up like offerings. When he finished, he wiped his nose with the back of his hand, a boy again for a heartbeat. I want to build something you'd recognize, and I want to be the kind of son who doesn't need to be forgiven this big ever again. Mildred reached out and set the river stone back where it had shivered under the wind. We will be fine, she told the ground. It will take work, but we will. They stood until the cold asked to be noticed. On the walk back to the car, Eddie pointed out a hawk patting the air above the tree line, its wings steady, the physics of grace pretending to be simple. Look, he said. They did. At the gate, Mildred's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Interview? Morning show wants your story. National audience. Control the narrative. She showed it to Michael. He shook his head. Don't let them eat you. They don't care if you're full at the end. Mildred smiled. I'm already full. She put the phone away. I'll speak when it saves someone and not a minute before. They got in the car. Eddie adjusted the mirror. The radio's broken, he announced solemnly. Mildred laughed, a sound that surprised them all. Drive, she said. We have a mailbox to defend. The city waited ahead. Courthouse steps,
headlines, a kitchen that smelled like rosemary. Behind them, the stone caught the sun and held it for a second, then let it go. The fault lines in their life hadn't healed, but they'd stopped widening. For now, that was enough.
The morning after the cemetery, the maple leaves look shinier than they have any right to. Dew beads along the veins like tiny mirrors. Eddie is already on a ladder when Mildred steps onto the porch. Camera in one hand, drill in the other, a coil of cable looped across his shoulder. Motion cam, door cam, and a little friend in the ficus, he says. Detective Chen's shopping list. Put one in the toaster while you're at it, Mildred says, and his grin warms the early air. By 9, the driveway has a new geometry of light. By 10, the DA's office calls. Mrs. Whitmore, it's ADA Laramie. The voice is brisk, not unkind. We have a proposed plea from Mrs. Maisie Whitmore's counsel. Full cooperation, sworn allocution in open court, restitution of all legal fees paid to Morrison and Associates, 3 years probation, 500 hours community service. Where? Mildred asks. At the court's discretion, Laramie says. We suggested the Maple Street Food Bank. They agreed. Mildred looks past the porch rail to where Eddie is coiling the last of the cable. He's humming a tune that doesn't know its name. That place again, she says softly. Laramie continues. There's a no-contact order proposed. Mrs. Whitmore may not approach you, your home, your place of worship. She can only communicate through counsel regarding dissolution proceedings. Mildred turns the phrase over. No contact. And the men in suits? Morrison's holding. One associate is on the edge of flipping. The other is too proud to spell his own name without a retainer. Laramie's tone flatlines. We'll get there. Mildred nods him to the phone. Schedule it. Allocution Friday at 10, the ADA says. We can send a driver. I have one, Mildred says, and glances toward the ladder. Eddie salutes with 2 fingers without looking down. Michael's house is 20 minutes away, if you don't count the minutes you wish didn't exist. He meets Mildred at the curb with a box under his arm labeled linens in a hand that wants to be steadier than it is. The living room smells like old flowers and cooling grief. The mantel still holds their wedding photo, Michael narrow-shouldered and earnest, Maisie bright as a lit match. Someone has turned the frame face down. She's at her sister's, Michael says, like it matters. The lawyer said it's cleaner. Clean is a word that lies to make a mess feel better, Mildred says. Let's pack. They work. Boxes bloom and seal. The sound of tape tearing becomes the metronome for moving on. In the bedroom, Mildred pulls open the closet and finds Harold's suit hanging among life they never lived here, left after a Thanksgiving, never retrieved. She lifts the jacket and feels weight in the inside pocket. What's that? Michael asks. She wants to say a heart, because it feels like one. She reaches in and brings out an envelope, yellowed at the edges, folded twice. The front reads simply, M. Her breath catches. The room narrows to the paper. Michael steps back without being told. She breaks the seal and slides out a single sheet. Harold's handwriting walks across the page, slanted, impatient, the way he wrote lists he intended to complete. If I go first, it begins, and I might, because I am stubborn with ladders, remember this. You are the keeper of our story. I don't want anyone to tell you what you know. Not lawyers, not doctors, not even Michael when he's in a rush and thinks he's invincible. I have not changed my mind. The will is what we decided. I love you for your lists and your stubbornness and the way you laugh when you burn the toast and won't throw it away. If you are reading this, you are braver than you wanted to be. Trust yourself. H. Mildred sits down on the edge of the bed, as if the letter is a hand on her shoulder. Michael sits beside her and looks at his shoes like they have committed a crime. He knew me, she says. The words crack and mend as they leave her mouth. He knew this. Somehow. Michael swallows hard. I didn't. Now you do, she says, and folds the letter back into its envelope like a sacred thing. They keep packing.
In the garage, amid vacation coolers and a treadmill that served as a coat rack, Michael slides open a bin and pulls out photographs in a tumble. A picture of him standing on a beach, wind in his hair, Maisie's arms around his waist. A Christmas where Mildred's laughing into Harold's shoulder and Michael's pretending to hate the matching sweaters. "How do I choose?" Michael asks. "You don't," Mildred says. "You sort." She makes 3 stacks on the workbench. Keeping, forgiving, forgetting. Michael watches her hands settle the decision for the moments that can't decide for themselves. When they're done, he presses his forehead to hers. "Thank you," he says, and it's the thank you of a boy who lost the thing he thought was holding him up and discovered the floor is kinder than he'd imagined. Friday arrives with a sky the color of paperwork. The courtroom clock ticks loud enough to be rude. Reporters lean forward like plants toward sun. Maisie stands at the lectern in a gray suit that might as well be a shroud. Her lawyer, a man who could apologize while holding a knife, nods at her to begin. She pulls a folded statement from a folder and sets it on the wood. But when she speaks, she's not reading. "I lied." Her voice shakes, then finds a line to walk. "I lied to my husband. I lied to my mother-in-law. I lied to myself about why I was doing it. I told myself we were drowning and I was saving our family. What I was doing was stealing. What I was doing was deciding somebody else's love belonged to me." The room is very still. Mildred's hands rest in her lap, one thumb rubbing a small circle into the other as she could erase a scar from the skin. "I took photographs to make it look like confusion," Maisie says. "I wrote captions that weren't true. I met with attorneys and nodded when they used words that meant crime because I wanted those words to mean solution. I signed papers I had no right to sign. I owe money for that. I owe hours for that. And I owe more than either of those can pay." She looks down, then back at the judge. "I am sorry." The words land like coins on a table, real, but not enough to buy anything. "I will testify. I will do the hours. I will not contact Mrs. Whitmore again." The judge watches her for a beat long before speaking. "Your remorse is not the centerpiece, Mrs. Whitmore. The harm is." The court accepts the plea. 3 years probation, 500 hours community service, restitution as agreed. No contact with the victim. Violate any of these terms and we revisit your sentence with prison clothes in mind. The gavel taps. It is not a thunderclap. It is exactly as soft as the law on a good day. Outside, microphones bloom again. "Mrs. Whitmore, are you mentally competent to manage your finances?" She stops. The crowd stumbles into its own sudden stillness. Mildred turns. "I am competent to recognize cruelty dressed up as concern," she says, voice even, "and competent to recognize kindness when it sleeps in a room over my garage and fixes my radiator." Eddie, 3 steps behind, flushes as if someone's put him under a warm lamp. She continues, "This isn't a story about my mind. It's a story about other people's choices." She nods and moves on. The microphones fall away like birds who realize the statue is a person, after all. The first morning of community service, Maisie stands outside the Maple Street Food Bank holding a clipboard like a shield. The building is cheerful because it refuses not to be. Bright posters, a chalkboard of needs, a bell that rings every time someone drops off a box. Eddie is here for an errand, loading a crate of donated greens into the trunk of Mildred's sedan. He sees her from the corner of his eye, and the corner of his jaw tightens. She turns, sees him, flinches, then squares herself. "Hello, Eddie." He closes the trunk slowly. "Mrs. Whitmore." He lets the formality hang. "Are you working or posing?" "Working," she says, and lifts the clipboard as if its weight proves it. "Good," he says. "Food doesn't care about your motives. It just gets eaten." A swallow moves in her throat. He doesn't give room. He gets in the car, belts in, and drives without looking back.
Inside, Maisie moves to the prep line. The volunteer at the sink, a woman with hands that laugh and a bandana that used to be a dress, hands her a knife. "Onions. Don't cry where they can see you. It salts the soup wrong." Maisie nods and starts slicing. The first cut is ragged. Chan sits at Mildred's kitchen table with a cup of coffee she didn't have to ask for. The porch camera app feeds a tiny silent square on Mildred's phone, 2 neighborhood cats, a pair of Jehovah's Witnesses, and a child who thinks the doorbell is part of hopscotch. We found your midnight pen pals. 2 gig workers off a message board. Paid cash. The car was a rental tied to a partner's niece. Sloppy, like I said. They'll cough up names when we squeeze. Will you charge them? Mildred asks. Yes, Chen says, with the small things that add up. Trespass. Harassment. The DA likes patterns. Juries do too. Mildred looks at the maple. They wanted to make me jump at shadows. You're allowed to jump, Chen says. You're not allowed to move out of your life. You didn't. Thanks to you, Mildred says. Chen gives her a look. Thanks to you. She stands, sets the cup in the sink. By the way, Elder Services asked if you'd speak at a workshop. Financial exploitation. What to watch for. Me? Mildred hears her own doubt like a second voice. I'm not a public person. You stood in front of 7 cameras and broke a question in half without raising your voice. You're public now. Use it. I think of Harold's letter folded in the drawer by the bread box. You are the keeper of our story. I'll do it. Good, Chen says. I'll sit in the back and nod like I taught you everything. At sunset, Michael shows up with a cardboard box and some good news held behind his teeth like a mint. Lease is signed, he says. Look, he holds up a key with a shaker tag. Whitmore Consulting. The tag is crooked and perfect. Proud of you, Mildred says, and pulls out a mason jar of iced tea for him and one for herself. They sit on the back steps and drink like people who've earned the right to be quiet. I saw the footage, Mom, outside the courthouse. The thing you said. I didn't rehearse it. I know, he says, and his voice is full on something like wonder. She nudges his knee with hers. How did the rest of the packing go? I left the mixer. She loves it more than cake. She'll need it for the soup, Mildred says, and surprises herself by not making it cruel. Michael's laugh is small and clean. Going to that workshop? Yes, she says, and tips her head. Want to come see your mother explain bank statements to a room of gray hair and good shirts who think scams happen to other people? I'll sit in the back and nod like I taught you everything, and they both smile at the accident of the echo. 2 days later, the community center smells like coffee and folding chairs. Mildred stands at the front of a room of gray hair and good shirts. A banner reads, Protecting What You Earned. Eddie fiddles with the projector. Chen lounges against the back wall like a cat pretending to be uninterested. Mildred begins without throat clearing. They will come for you, she says. They will come speaking your language. Love, fear, exhaustion. They will offer to help and ask you to sign on the dotted line. They will turn your pride into a leash and call it a favor. She talks about wills and trusts and the kindness of a second set of eyes. She talks about telling your children the boring truth before someone else tells them the exciting lie. She watches men shift in their chairs and women write notes and an old fellow in a veteran's cap straighten like he's being inspected and doesn't mind it for once. At the end, a woman approaches with shaky hands. My niece handles my pills and my mail. What if... Then you ask to see every envelope before it goes. And if she balks, you call me, and I'll come over with a pie and a policeman. The room laughs. They believe her. After, Eddie loads the car with leftover pamphlets like they are fragile. Chen touches Mildred's shoulder. You were good. I was honest. It's easier than lying, less to remember. On the drive home, the radio is broken, but they don't fix it. The silence feels like a choir that learned to sing without needing a song. That night, a message arrives in Mildred's inbox from a name she doesn't recognize. The subject line is plain. Thank you. The body is one sentence. I run the Tuesday night line at Maple Street. She's quiet, she works hard, and she looks like someone learning what hunger is from the inside out. Mildred reads it twice. She doesn't reply. Not because she can't, because the space after the period is the only place to put forgiveness until it decides if it wants a chair. She goes outside, and stands under the maple. The moon sits in its high white seat. The leaves move like a whispered conversation you're not meant to catch word for word. Inside, the letter waits in the drawer by the bread box. She doesn't take it out tonight. She knows what it says. She says it to herself anyway. Trust yourself. She does. The phone rings at 11:18. Michael's name. She answers on the second ring. "I'm okay," he says before she can ask. "Just, I needed to hear your voice." "You have it," she says. "What is it?" "I walked past the office tonight. The lights were off and I stood on the sidewalk like a creep and stared at my own name on the glass. I felt not afraid. That's new." "It suits you," she says. He inhales, exhales. "Mom, this is going to sound childish, but will we be okay?" "We are okay," she says. "And it's not a promise. It's a report." After she hangs up, she turns lights off one by one. The house surrenders its day. On the landing to the workshop apartment, Eddie has left a bag of rolls again, bakery paper this time, honesty in the fold. She smiles, takes two, sets one under a tea towel for morning, and eats one over the sink like a teenager. When she finally slips into bed, the window cracked for the night air, the house is quiet enough to hear the maple count the breeze. She closes her eyes. Somewhere downtown, a silver-haired man signs a piece of paper that begins, "I admit." Somewhere on Maple Street, a woman in a gray suit learns the weight of onions and the sting they put in your eyes, whether you deserve it or not. Somewhere on a storefront window, Whitmore Consulting reflects a man who has decided to be ordinary in all the ways that matter. And in a drawer by the bread box, a letter sits, unnecessary and vital at the same time. Mildred sleeps. Not the sleep of the innocent, the sleep of the competent, the sleep of someone who knows where the documents are and where the people belong. Tomorrow can come whenever it likes.
The hallway outside Department 12 hums like a hive. Reporters, relatives, the low murmur of strangers betting on outcomes they won't have to live with. Mildred stands by the window where the light is good, pearls tucked under her blouse, hands folded over Harold's letter sealed back into its envelope. Eddie is a shoulder's length away, not touching, present the way a handrail is present. ADA Laramie materializes at their side with a stack of binders and caffeine that smells like courage. "Day one," she says. "We'll keep it tight. Eddie first, then Michael. If the judge allows, we'll play the conference room audio." A quick dart of eyes to Mildred. "You ready?" "I've been ready since they told me I was not," Mildred says. Inside, the courtroom chills as if someone opened a door to weather. Morrison sits at counsel table, hair slick, tie precise. His associates wear suits that fit like borrowed armor. Maisie, at the witness bench's periphery, looks smaller than the furniture. She stares at her hands as if they might answer better than her mouth. "All rise." The judge takes her seat. The gavel taps a polite warning. "People, call your first witness." "Edward Kowalski," Laramie says. Eddie walks to the stand like a man walking into his own house after a break-in, alert, steady. He raises his right hand, swears, sits. The jurors, 8 ordinary strangers and 4 alternates, study him the way people study weather, deciding if they need umbrellas. "Mr. Kowalski," Laramie begins, voice even, "how long did you work at Morrison & Associates?" 12 years, he says. "Paralegal, case prep, filing, the kind of work that makes things seem official." "And why were you terminated?" "I need too much about the parts they didn't want official." A ripple moves through the gallery. He doesn't chase it. "They said restructuring. They meant stop asking questions." She takes him through the spine of the scheme. Visits by a client named Maisie, documents that arrived pre-filled with lies, invoices that pretended to be something else. Eddie keeps his hands flat, answers short. When he says, "I made copies before they cleaned the files," a juror with a teacher's haircut nods as if she found the lesson. Defense rises slowly, a smile kerosene slick. "Mr. Kowalski," the lawyer purrs, "you were fired." "Yes." "Disgruntled." "Correct," Eddie says, and a chuckle blows through the benches before the judge's look smothers it. "Disgruntled at crime." "You were homeless." The word lands like a shoe with mud on it.
For a while, Eddie says. Not anymore. So, a man with motive to lie and nowhere to go. No, Eddie says, not loud. A man with nothing to sell and a neighbor with a porch. Did you steal client files? I preserved evidence of a felony. By removing documents from your employer? By keeping what they were about to burn? Eddie's gaze doesn't waver. They weren't preserving justice, they were laundering it. Your language is colorful, the lawyer says dryly. It's my life, Eddie says. The lawyer pivots. You expected to be paid for your cooperation? No. You expect a job, a reward. I have one, Eddie says, glancing toward the gallery where Mildred sits inside her own steady silhouette. Caretaker, groundskeeper, sometimes I fix the toaster. A juror smiles into his lap. No further questions, the lawyer snaps. Laramie stands again, one question like a stitch to close a wound. Mr. Kowalski, why did you come forward? Eddie looks at the jury as if they are more than 12 chairs. Because a decent man died, because his name deserved the truth. Nothing further. He steps down. Mildred's breath leaves her like a tide and finds its way back without crashing. People call Michael Whitmore. Michael walks awkward, like his clothes remember another life. He swears in, sits, glances once at his mother, permission asked, permission granted. Mr. Whitmore, Laramie says, describe your financial situation in the last 2 years. Bad, he says, and gives the math. Contracts that fell through, loans that ballooned when revenue didn't, the honest stupidity of believing it would all turn because he wanted it to. He talks about email filters he didn't set, a line of credit he didn't open. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't cry. When he says, I believed my wife when she told me my mother was slipping, he looks like a man holding a hot coal because he deserves it. Defense goes at him. Pride, negligence, convenient ignorance. Michael doesn't flinch. I was wrong, he says. That's not a defense. It's an affidavit. The judge glances over her glasses. The lawyer sits down faster than he planned. Laramie stands. The people move to admit People's 19A, the audio recovered from Morrison and Associates Conference Room A on May 14th, time-stamped 2:03 p.m. through 2:15 p.m. Defense bristles. Foundation, Your Honor. The device was maintained in the ordinary course, recovered pursuant to warrant, chain of custody established. A tiny argument flares and dies. The judge nods. Admitted. The courtroom speakers cough to life. For a moment, the past fills the room like a ghost returning to the place of injury. On the recording, Morrison's voice, velvet wrapped around a brick, Mrs. Whitmore, we have several documents for your signature. It's all very straightforward. Paper slide. A pause. A whisper not meant for the mic. Maisie's voice, thin and conspiratorial. She won't read. She's, foggy. Another rustle, a male associate. Get signatures first, explanations later.
On the bench, the jurors stiffen, a collective vertebrae. In the gallery, someone exhales like they've been holding air since spring. The recording clicks off. The room is louder in the silence that follows. Laramie doesn't smile. Nothing further. Defense tries a small fire. Context, jokes, hyperbole. The judge taps her pen. The jury will assess the weight. They break for lunch. The hallway roars. Reporters circle. Someone shoves a mic too close. Eddie shifts toward Mildred, but she's already moving, calm, like ships pull into harbor. She doesn't answer questions about competence. When a woman asks, "Do you feel vindicated?" Mildred says, "I feel tired." Vindication is for people who had the luxury of being believed from the start. Back inside, the afternoon session opens with a notary who looks like regret in a suit. He explains signatures that didn't match, stamps used on dates that didn't exist. He was told it was routine. It was not. Then Maisie. She's led to the stand like someone being shown her own reflection after a long illness. She takes the oath. When she sits, she doesn't look at Mildred. The no-contact order has teeth and posture. Mrs. Whitmore, Laramie says, voice neutral, explain your involvement. Maisie folds her hands and unfolds them. I started with a story, she says. I told myself I was helping. Then I started telling other stories, and they were all the same shape as theft. She detailed the meetings in quiet rooms, the instructions couched as best practices, the camera in her purse at the grocery store, the captions written at her kitchen table with the TV on low because guilt sounds like background noise if you let it. Why? Laramie asks. Because we were drowning, Maisie says. We've heard that word, Laramie says. Try again. Maisie's lips tremble. Because I wanted relief, and I took it from the nearest person I thought wouldn't fight. And did she fight? Yes, she says. She learned how. Defense circles, tries to recast. You felt pressured. I pressed, she says. They pushed. I pushed too. In the gallery, Michael stares at his knees, hands clenched. Mildred's eyes don't move. She's not forgiving. She's witnessing. Court adjourns. The judge's gavel sounds like a door set carefully into its frame. People stand, whisper, file out. On the steps, a man in a suit brushes too close to Eddie, mutters without looking at him, "Rats don't testify." Eddie stops, pivots, locates the voice, associate number 2, the one too proud to spell his name without a retainer. Before Eddie can answer, a hand lands lightly on the man's elbow. Detective Chen. Counselor, she says, tone pure sunshine. Say it again. I need it for my report. He smiles with all his teeth and none of his sense. I said, that's plenty, Chen says, already taking out her phone. Witness intimidation is uglier in daylight. The man blanches and disappears into the swarm. Chen turns to Eddie. You good? I like the new porch camera, he says. It travels well. She winks. Get your person home. At dusk, the kitchen fills with steam and rosemary again, as if victory can be simmered. Eddie chops with the comfort of a man who knows where the knives live. Mildred stands at the sink, sleeves rolled, letter on the counter beneath a saucer like an anchor. Michael knocks and doesn't wait to be asked in. I thought I could bring bread, he says, lifting a loaf that actually looks like it was baked by a human who meant it. You can bring yourself, Mildred says. The bread is a bonus. They eat. Nobody talks about the audio until the second helping. When they do, they talk about it like engineers, where the mic must have been, how sound travels across polished wood, the accident of a red light telling the truth. Michael puts his fork down. I'm going to testify in sentencing. For you. Not against anyone. For you. He looks at his mother like she might say no. She doesn't. Eddie clears the plates. The house hums with a quiet that's earned rather than imposed. The doorbell rings. 3 soft notes. Michael freezes, but Eddie doesn't. He goes to the monitor, checks the porch camera. A woman stands there in a denim jacket, a bag slung cross-body, early 40s maybe, a nurse's fatigue in the way she shifts her weight. Eddie cracks the door. Can we help you? I'm sorry to bother you. I didn't know if I should. I run Tuesday nights at Maple Street. She glances past him, toward the kitchen, catches sight of Mildred, straightens. I'm not here for her, she says quickly. I'm here for you. People come in thinking they're the only ones ever hurt. Your story travels. Folks are raising their hands sooner. We served 30 more families last week because people who had extra weren't afraid to admit that. Mildred swallows something that tastes like humility. Thank you, she says, for feeding my city. That's the job. Yours too, I guess. She gives a small salute and steps back into the blue hour, vanishing down the walk like someone who knows where she's going. Eddie shuts the door gently. Michael releases breath. Mildred stands very still, palms pressed flat to the wood like she's thanking it for bearing the knocks. Friday's cross-examination starts like a storm you see from a distance and convince yourself is going in another direction. Defense moves to exclude Eddie's copies, to paint them as fruits from a poisoned tree. Laramie counters with the warrant, the chain, the audio that didn't come from Eddie at all. The judge denies with a phrase that will become a footnote. The truth has standing. The notary cracks further, admits a cash envelope slid across a desk on a day the books said no meetings were scheduled.
Bergman, the flipping associate, takes the stand and names the amounts. A juror writes the numbers down like a grocery list she will not forget to bring. By afternoon, Morrison is less silver fox and more a man caught on the wrong night of a full moon. His lawyer rises to rehabilitate, calls 6 character witnesses who loved a version of him that wore tuxedos and donated to rooftops. On redirect, Laramie asks each in turn, "Did he ever forge a judge's signature at your gala?" Objection, sustained. The jurors smile like people getting away with inside jokes. Before adjournment, Laramie stands for a small, precise cut. For the record, the people will show a pattern of targeting elderly spouses with recent bereavement. Melded feels the words in her bones like weather. In the back row, an older man in a cap, maybe the veteran from the workshop, touches his chest, a habit that could be prayer. The judge bangs the gavel. Monday, closings. Outside, the sky is low and soft, a blanket over a restless sleep. The reporters ask Mildred for a quote. She gives them vegetables instead. "Don't leave your loved ones off the paperwork out of pride," she says. "Let them help before someone else does." A young reporter with a nose ring lowers her mic. "My grandmother won't let us do it," she says. "She says it's rude." "Tell her it's rude to leave you a mess. Tell her I said so." The reporter laughs. "I will." Night. The porch light throws a circle on the steps. Eddie sits with a string of little bulbs he intends to hang along the eaves when the case is over. In celebration, he says. And Mildred doesn't ask which outcome he thinks counts. Michael says goodnight and goes. The loaf of bread half gone by consent. The house returns to its 3 heartbeats. "Do you think the jury liked me?" Eddie asks into the dark, half joking, half the kind of child nobody picked for teams. "I think they recognized you," Mildred says. "That's better." He nods, eyes on the string of olives coiled like a patient snake. "You going to read the letter again?" "Not tonight," she says. "I know what it says." "I do too," he says. "It says, keep the porch light on." She smiles at that. Something like that. A moth bangs itself against the bulb, frantic for its own idea of heaven. The maple shifts. Somewhere a train insists on being noticed. Mildred stands. "Monday," she says. "Monday," Eddie echoes, and lifts the coil of lights like a promise he intends to keep. Monday morning. The courthouse steps are slick with drizzle, microphones blooming like wet flowers. Mildred holds Harold's letter in her purse, the paper softened from touch, but still unbroken. Eddie carries a thermos of coffee in one hand, umbrella in the other, a silent shield against rain and questions. Michael walks beside them, collar up, face bare, no armor left to wear. Inside, the jury files in with the gravity of a congregation. Morrison sits pale, lips tight, suit impeccable, the skin beneath it frayed. His associates look like they've memorized prayers they don't believe. Maisie sits apart, hands folded, eyes locked on nothing. All rise. The judge enters. She looks tired, but steady, like someone who has read too many sad stories and still insists on punctuation. Counsel, closings. ADA Laramie stands, adjusts her notes but doesn't look at them. Her voice carries without rising. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is not complicated. It is not clever. It is theft. Wrapped in paperwork, hidden in jargon, dressed in suits, but theft. These defendants targeted a widow in her grief. They forged documents, fabricated medical reports, and whispered lies into a family's ear until it doubted its own heartbeat. They were paid for this cruelty. Paid well." She walks to the jury box, stops just shy of crossing the invisible line. "You heard Eddie Kowalski. 12 years in their office, discarded when he noticed too much. You heard Michael Whitmore, who admitted his own blindness, but told you the truth when he saw it. You heard Maisie Whitmore, under oath, confess how she turned ordinary moments into evidence of dementia.
And you heard their own voices on tape, plotting to rush signatures, mocking a grieving woman. Her eyes sweep them. The defense will ask you to look away. Don't. Look at Mrs. Mildred Whitmore. She gestures. Mildred sits, spine straight. She is not fragile. She is not confused. She is a woman whose husband trusted her for 42 years. These men tried to erase that. You cannot erase truth. You can only cover it. Your job is to pull the cover back. She returns to her table. We ask you to convict. Thank you. Defense rises, silver hair matching his client. He smiles like rot under polish. Ladies and gentlemen, stories are powerful. My colleague just told you one. But stories are not evidence. Emotions are not facts. He gestures toward Eddie. A disgruntled employee. Terminated, homeless, desperate. What better motive to invent a tale of corruption? To Michael. A son embarrassed by debt, eager to shift blame to others. To Maisie. A young woman overwhelmed, manipulated into exaggerations. Poor judgment, yes. Criminal intent? No. He paces. And the tapes? Words without context, a conversation sliced from its setting, spun into guilt by a district attorney who wants headlines. He leans closer to the jury. Ask yourselves, is this certainty beyond a reasonable doubt? Or is it grief and anger weaponized into a narrative? The law requires more. If you hesitate, if you wonder, your duty is clear. Acquit. He sits, satisfied, as if words can unmake evidence. The judge instructs. Legal language folds over itself. Burden, intent, doubt, unanimity. The jury files out. The courtroom exhales. Mildred closes her eyes. She feels Harold's letter like a pulse in her purse. Eddie touches her elbow lightly. Breathe, he whispers. Hours stretch. Reporters wait outside like wolves in drizzle. Inside, the benches empty and refill. Murmurs crest and fall. Michael paces, sits, rises, paces again. Maisie remains still, eyes red but dry, as if tears are luxuries she no longer affords. At last, all rise. The jury files in. 12 faces, unreadable. Madam Foreperson, have you reached a verdict? A woman in a cardigan nods, hands over the forms. The clerk reads, on count 1, forgery in the first degree, we find the defendant, Charles Morrison, guilty. Morrison blinks, jaw tight. On count 2, fraudulent practices, we find the defendant, guilty. Gasps ripple. The second associate drops his gaze to the table. Guilty, guilty, guilty. The clerk's voice builds a rhythm, each word another brick set in the wall of consequence. When Maisie's name comes, it's different. On count 6, conspiracy to commit fraud, we find the defendant, Maisie Whitmore, guilty. But then, sentence as per plea agreement. Probation, service, restitution. Her head bows. Michael covers his face with his hands. The courtroom stirs like a shaken hive. The judge bangs her gavel. Order. Sentencing to follow. Mildred breathes once, deep. Not triumph. Something heavier. She looks at Morrison, the polished mask cracked, the man behind it ordinary and afraid. She looks at Maisie, small, diminished, yet still alive to walk out of here. And she looks at Michael, who has aged a decade in a season, who whispers to no one, it's over. On the courthouse steps, microphones rush again. rain beads on plastic covers. Mildred lifts her chin, her voice steady. Justice is not celebration. It's repair. Slow, imperfect, but necessary. Do you forgive your daughter-in-law? Mildred's pause is deliberate. Forgiveness is not the same as trust. She will serve her sentence. I will serve mine, living with what she did. Eddie's umbrella holds over her head. The cameras flash. That night, the house smells like stew again. Michael sits at the table, face pale but calmer. I'm filing, he says quietly. The divorce. I can't build a future on a past that false. Mildred reaches across, takes his hand, then builds something Harold would recognize. Eddie sits bread on the table, sits without ceremony. The three of them eat. No speeches, just food, and the knowledge that storms end even if the ground is still wet. Later, alone, Mildred opens Harold's letter once more. Trust yourself, it says. She smiles, folds it back. Outside, Eddie strings the lights along the eaves. Bulbs blink to life, soft and steady. A constellation built for one house, one porch, one woman who has carried the truth through fire. The verdict is done. The story isn't. Tomorrow waits. The courtroom smells like old wood and wet coats. Sentencing day. No cameras allowed, but you can feel them pressed against the walls, in people's pockets, in their throats. Mildred sits in the first row, Harold's letter in her purse, a folded square against her palm. Eddie takes the aisle seat. Michael sits beside his mother, hands open on his knees like he's waiting to catch something heavy. The judge reads in a level voice that names without savoring. Charles Morrison, stand. Morrison rises, silver hair immaculate, jaw set like he's decided granite is a virtue. This court has weighed your years of service against the pattern of predation, the judge says. Your firm targeted the recently bereaved. You used law as a costume. 4 years in state custody. Restitution as ordered. Remand immediately. A ripple goes through the benches. Shock, relief, a breath that had been held since spring. The first associate, 2 years. The second, 2 years. The words stack like bricks you don't want, but need. Victim impact, the judge says. Mrs. Mildred Whitmore. Mildred rises. The room tilts toward her. She walks to the lectern and lays both hands on the edge as if smoothing a tablecloth. I won't spend any more of my life on your names, she says quietly. My husband's name is Harold. He trusted me. You tried to erase that. You failed. She doesn't look at Morrison. She looks at the judge. I ask for a sentence that teaches other men in clean suits to fear the same consequences the rest of us do. She turns and returns to her seat. Michael squeezes her hand once. Hard. Eddie exhales. The judge nods. So ordered. Mrs. Maisie Whitmore, the clerk calls. Maisie stands at counsel table, the gray suit again, sleeves too long, hair tucked behind her ears like it doesn't know where to go. The judge doesn't relitigate. Plea accepted. 3 years probation. 500 hours community service. Restitution to the victim. No contact. Violate this order, and the suspended sentence will be executed. Yes, Your Honor, Maisie says. Her voice doesn't break. It doesn't need to. Cuffs click. The partners are led away. The door shuts gently, like a librarian asking for quiet after a loud chapter. On the sidewalk, rain freckles the stone. Reporters lean forward. Mrs. Whitmore, justice served. Justice started, Mildred says. The serving takes time. They want more. They don't get it. Eddie lifts an umbrella over her. Michael steps to the other side. For a moment, on the courthouse steps, the three of them are a small constellation that does not ask permission to exist. Maple Street Food Bank, a week later. Fluorescents hum, onions surrender on the cutting board. The volunteer coordinator, Denise, tattoo of a sparrow on her wrist, hands out hairnets like crowns no one wants. Maisie stands at the prep table, sleeves rolled, knife awkward in her hand. She chops. Tears come and could be the onions, could be something else. Denise doesn't ask. The door chimes. Eddie shoulders in carrying 2 crates of greens and a paper bag with a loaf peeking out. He sets them on the stainless counter. From Mrs. W.'s garden and a bakery that doesn't gossip. Denise smiles. Bless both. Maisie looks up. Eddie meets her eyes long enough to make the boundary visible. How is she? Maisie asks, voice low, not soft. Living, Eddie says. Don't ask again. Maisie nods. She doesn't. She goes back to the onions. Denise slides a pot toward her. Salt it like you're correcting someone. Maisie measures carefully, a woman learning there are right amounts after all. Maple Street Consulting smells like paint and hope. The front window has Michael's name hand-stenciled, imperfect enough to prove a person did it. A few friends, a box of Costco muffins pretending to be a spread. Detective Chen slips in at the back with a grin and a plant in a pot that says, "Don't die." Michael stands with the ribbon scissors, looking like a boy in a school play who forgot his line and decides to improvise. Dad told me once that the best sentence in business is, "I don't know, but I'll find out." So that's our mission statement. Also, if you call us, we will call you back. Laughter. Honest. Brief. He looks at Mildred. There's one more thing. He lifts a small frame off the desk and turns it so the room can see. Harold's handwriting. High-resolution scan. The line bold and impatient. Trust yourself. Mildred's breath hitches. She had known he'd framed it. Michael swallows. We'll try. The scissors cut. The ribbon parts. People clap. Detective Chen hands the plant to Eddie because she knows Mildred won't carry it and Michael will forget to water it. She puts it by the window. Plants and men both do better with light. Yes, ma'am, Eddie says, and obeys. When the room thins, Michael leans against the desk. Mom, he says, could Dad have imagined this? He imagined the parts he could put in writing, Mildred says. The rest he left to us. They stand together in the little office that has decided to be honest. The community center multipurpose room is half folding chairs and half history. A banner. Elder Safety Night. Mildred wears a simple jacket and the pearls. Armor under plain cloth. She sets handouts on each chair. 5 things to do before anyone asks you to sign anything. People filter in with the precise steps of those who don't know if they're in the right place. An old man with a cane, a woman with perfect lipstick and a new bruise of worry between her eyebrows, a couple who take 2 chairs and then drag them 3 inches closer together. Mildred begins without introduction. Scammers like grief and pride. Grief is soft, pride is brittle. Both break. They count on you to be alone. She talks about reading every page out loud, about asking someone who loves you to sit in the room while the pen is uncapped. She tells them how to say no without apology. She points to the sheet. Write these numbers on your refrigerator. Write mine if it helps. A laugh ripples. She means it anyway. Questions, stories. A woman with a tremor asks, "What if it's my own son?" Mildred looks at Michael in the back row, standing with folded arms like he's boxed up his guilt, but kept the lid open. Then you tell him the truth. You love him, and you won't let him harm you. If he's the man you raised, he'll come back to himself. After, the old man with the cane lingers. Your husband. He must have been something. He was, Mildred says. He still is. He left me homework. What's that? To trust myself. They both nod, like it's a sentence they've finally earned. Detective Chen corners her by the coffee urn. You're good at this. I'm practiced and well coached, she tips her head toward Chen. She smiles. We're starting a clinic night, pro bono consults. I need a civilian who scares people into bringing their real paperwork. Mildred laughs. I do not scare people. You do, Chen says cheerfully, but only the right ones. Say yes. Yes, Mildred says, surprising herself with how quickly it comes. Great, Chen says. Eddie can hand out cookies and stern looks. I can do both, Eddie says, appearing with a tray and a face that has learned to hold room for other people's fear. Evening. The garden behind the workshop is green in a way only late summer can earn. Eddie has run string lights from the maple to the eaves, a warm constellation that makes the back steps look like a stage built for small truths. He plugs them in. They blink, then glow. Michael arrives with the pie from the bakery with the honest pricing and sets it on the table like an offering to a god he hopes is kind. They eat slices on mismatched plates. The first star shows up over the neighbor's roof and pretends not to be late. "I saw Maisie at the food bank," Michael says finally. "I didn't speak." "Good," Mildred says. "She looked—" He searches for a word and throws the wrong ones away. "She looked like someone who knows the names of onions now." Mildred nods. It's not forgiveness. It's a weather report. He clears his throat. "Thank you for coming to the office. For the frame." "Thank you for the sentence," she says. "We will try." That's all anyone can demand. Eddie leans back, chair creaking. "I have a confession," he says. "The radiator doesn't leak anymore." "That's not a confession. That's bragging." "I don't know the difference yet," Eddie says, grinning. They laugh. The sound feels like a room finding its right echo. Mildred stands and goes inside. The kitchen light spills onto tile she has cleaned 1,000 times and will clean 1,000 more. She opens the drawer by the bread box, takes out the envelope, slides the letter free. She reads it again, even though she knows it by heart. Knowing is part of the ritual. You are the keeper of our story. Trust yourself. She finds a shadow box frame Eddie salvaged from a yard sale and restored with sandpaper and quiet stubbornness. She centers the letter, pins it with brass tacks that gleam modestly, seals the back with brown tape. She carries it into the living room and hangs it above the desk where bills are paid and lists are written. When she steps back, the wall looks complete in a way it hadn't known to want. Eddie appears in the doorway, hands in his pockets to keep from helping when help isn't needed. "Good height," he says. "I used a level," Mildred says, and he nods as if she's confessed a secret he respects. Michael comes in last, wiping pie crumbs from his fingers, stopping when he sees the frame. He stands there a long time. "Hey, Dad," he says softly. And Mildred pretends she didn't hear it because some sentences belong to the person brave enough to say them. The three of them move back to the porch. The maple lifts and settles as if breathing with them. Across the street, a porch light clicks on, then another. It makes the block look like a runway for returning. Eddie points. "We started a trend." "Keep the porch light on," Michael says. "For who?" Mildred asks. "For whoever needs to find their way back," he says. And it doesn't sound like a line he rehearsed. They sit until the mosquitoes remind them they live in a world with small annoyances. Inside, dishes wait. The mail on the hall table includes an envelope with a court seal. Boring, necessary things. Life is, again, mostly paperwork and meals and people who knock before entering. Before bed, Mildred writes 3 notes at the kitchen table, her pen moving with a new confidence that doesn't show off. One to the community center confirming clinic nights, one to the elder law attorney who agreed to volunteer, thanking her with actual gratitude instead of flowers, one to herself, folded small and tucked in the drawer where she keeps rubber bands. Things I know without asking. The maples will go red. The radiator will behave until January. Eddie drinks his coffee black when he's worried, and with milk when he's okay. Michael likes bad muffins more than good cake. Harold was right about me. Trust yourself. She leaves the note there for the days she forgets. Upstairs, the bedroom is cool. She unclasps the pearls and sets them in the ceramic leaf dish. She stands at the window and looks over the yard. Eddie's apartment light is on. A book tilts in his hand. He looks up and, without embarrassment, waves like neighbors do in towns that haven't heard they're not supposed to. She waves back. He turns off the lamp. The string lights hum their small electric hymn. Mildred lies down. The house settles. Somewhere down the block, a dog decides it has said enough for one night. The maple answers in leaves. In the morning, there will be emails and errands, and at noon, a call from a woman who begins with, "I'm sorry to bother you," and ends with, "Thank you." There will be a workshop in a week where an old man will nod so hard his cap slides back and nobody laughs. There will be a bill from the plumber that is fair, and a bag of onions that costs less than you'd think for the way it changes soup. For now, there is this: the steady thrum of a house that kept standing, the letter on the wall like a lighthouse, the porch light burning, the knowledge that grief doesn't end, but it loosens its fist, the certainty that the story is hers to keep and tell. Mildred closes her eyes. "Good night, Harold," she says into the dark, and hears, as clearly as if he were at the door, the reply he always gave when the day had been too much. "We did fine." She believes him. The lights outside keep watch. The maple keeps counsel. The house sleeps. And the story, hers, goes on.